Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. Live on the phone with me today, I have Mike Steinerd from New York. Mike is the Director of Recruiting at Indeed.com. Indeed is the #1 job site worldwide with over 140 million unique visitors per month. Indeed is available in more than 50 countries and 28 languages, covering 94% of global GDP. Mike, thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure, Angela.
Well, I think you know I'm a huge fan of Indeed, and I actually recommend it to my clients. I mention in my ebook, and I write about it in the newspaper here in Memphis, and I talk about it on my blog. So I use it practically every day. Can you please help our listeners to understand a little bit about why you believe that online job searching is so important today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think very simple. Companies really use the internet to advertise their business, their open positions, and subsequently look to engage people through the internet today. And so as there's hiring needs, the internet allows companies to really engage millions of people about their positions, within a very short period of time. And, quite frankly, in like manner, job seekers have come to rely on the internet to find work and showcase their targets. It's easy to use. It provides really a high degree of convenience. Mm-hmm. And, now that mobile has become so prevalent, job seekers are really starting to use mobile to find jobs on the internet as well.
Mm-hmm. I can totally imagine. I've noticed actually with my own site metrics that most of my visitors are using their cell phones. So that's a really interesting point.
Yeah, in fact, actually, right now we're tracking about 1 out of 2 job seekers using mobile to look for work. So that trend is increasing considerably. It was 33% in 2013, and now it's up to roughly 50% throughout 2014. So we expect that trend to continue.
Wow. I think that's smart because, I think it keeps job seekers from looking, say, on their work computer, and instead, they've got more control usually over that mobile phone.
Yeah, well, think about it, right? If you're a job seeker that's, gainfully employed and maybe not necessarily running from a burning building, mm-hmm. If you have the luxury of sitting on the train for an hour or a half hour, or whatever the case may be, the ability for you to really search jobs seamlessly during that time just makes it so much easier for that passive job seeker.
Absolutely. So on average, how many jobs do you have on Indeed.com every day?
Yeah, so the number changes, kind of increases all the time, but as the #1 search engine for jobs worldwide, we're probably adding around 100,000 jobs per day. And if I did a quick search, let's say, of the U.S., I would probably find about 3 million jobs on average on that search.
Wow.
So, yeah, jobs are sort of added and taken down as companies fill jobs, and as we continue to kind of clean the content that we bring on, we'll constantly update that number.
That's really incredible to think about the kind of power that you have at your fingertips as a job seeker to be able to just sort through so many different opportunities all at one time.
Yeah, it really is, and obviously a tool like Indeed does allow the job seeker to get pretty granular with their search and try and minimize how many jobs per page they may see. So at the end of the day, they're actually helping the hiring company as well because they've sort of winnowed down their own search. And so by the time they apply, that hiring organization will, see them potentially as a better fit.
Absolutely. Well, so speaking of jobs being posted online, I often hear rumors that many jobs are not posted online, and I really have a hard time believing this, to be totally honest. But what % of jobs do you feel are available and posted online?
I would suggest that a high percentage of the positions are advertised in some form on the internet. The reality is they may appear in less conventional avenues such as blogs or other niche sites. But aggregators such as Indeed, will do a pretty good job of aggregating that content wherever it may be. I guess the one thing I would say, there's some of those rumors may be as a result of organizations hiring folks internally into roles, and or even sometimes maybe creating a role that fits somebody's skill set that's already in another job within the organization. But it behooves an organization today to run an advert out online. The cost and so forth is pretty low, all things considered, to the traffic they may receive.
Sure. The rumors that I hear often come from headhunters. And, what I do is really different than headhunting. I'm a coach for job seekers, and I'm an advocate for those job seekers. But so the folks that often tell me, jobs are really not posted online are the recruiters. I tend to find the headhunters that are sort of looking to corner the market on, that particular person. And so I just tend to feel that most jobs are posted online, and, the job seeker really needs to be kind of their own advocate and not necessarily just wait for a headhunter to find something for them.
Oh, absolutely. No, I would totally agree with that statement. And I think, to your point, you have to really look at the very audience that may be, sort of bringing those rumors up, right? So I think it behooves job seekers really to look at all online mechanisms that may exist and make sure that it's certainly a big part of their search.
Right, absolutely. Well, I think when you think about online job seeking, one factor that comes into account is that there are just so many people applying for jobs online. And I know, at least here in Memphis, I hear a lot of rumors that when a new job is posted, that within 24 hours, sometimes they receive hundreds of applications. From your perspective, what can a candidate do to kind of make them stand out more when they apply online, given that there are so many people applying for individual jobs?
What I suggest to individuals, and what Indeed would suggest, is I think people need to be honest with themselves regarding their skills and experience, and really first and foremost target positions for which they're qualified. Make a list of the types of companies, the culture, even to some degree the types of person you may want to work for, to help navigate the jobs that they may see online. And the more organized and targeted they are in their approach, the more time they're going to really have to differentiate themselves. And you also have to ask yourself, does the resume speak to the role? Is the resume impactful? Does it list the successes and accomplishments that solve a prospective company's challenge? And so job seekers really need to look at those requirements that a company's listed and determine if their resume appropriately addresses the company's needs. So,
yeah, I completely agree. That's really great feedback. I mean, especially on the resume side, I do work with a lot of my job seekers in terms of helping them to improve their personal brand, especially on their resume. Because many times the first person that sees your resume, it could be someone from human resources who's kind of helping to go through those hundreds of applications. And they may not fully understand what it is that you do. So it's important that your resume really speaks to that job posting.
Yeah, I would agree, and that's not to say that the job seeker is going to essentially copy the job requirements onto their resume, but they really need to take a step back and ask themselves as objectively as they can, do the things I've done, does my experience align well here, and subsequently, does the resume speak to that? And I think because individuals on the client side may or may not be trained to really look at a resume, and so they're going to just look at whether it be acronyms or certain buzzwords, and so the job seeker does need to be conscious of those things and make sure that their resume can speak to the very things the client's looking for, assuming they've had those qualities.
Well, also along the lines of applying, how quickly should someone apply online when they see a job posted?
I think as quickly as they can. And again, if they're using, if they have a mobile device, it makes it that much easier to do it. But as a recruiter myself, my goal is to have job seekers apply as soon as possible. And I think, whether it be something on the mobile device or whether it be job alerts that, Indeed allows job seekers to set up those jobs will come to people as soon as they're posted.
Mm-hmm.
They can capture those jobs, be alerted to that fact, and subsequently send, let's say, a copy of their Indeed resume right to that client almost instantaneously.
Can you talk a little bit about the job alerts feature that Indeed offers? I mean, what does that help job seekers to do?
Yeah, basically a job seeker can go on to Indeed and essentially create a search string, if you will, for the very jobs that they would look for. So, for example, if you went on to Indeed the first time and you put in the parameters that you wanted to look for, let's say location, let's say sales, a variety of things, you can effectively save that search string and have it become sort of an alert so that Indeed then will send all like jobs that sort of fall into that alert. And obviously you'll have those really at your disposal.
Mm-hmm. And it sends them to you in an email, is that right?
Yes.
That's great. I mean, I think that's just so helpful because that way, the job seeker can just stay on top of it, the latest jobs immediately, and they don't have to kind of stalk them down quite as much. I think it's a great feature.
Yeah, and with Indeed's apply technology, if the individual has an Indeed resume set up, it is literally as simple as just having that apply technology send that resume right to that job. So it really can be seconds.
That's great. So, that's excellent. So when someone is using the apply technology, can anyone see that their resume is out there, or is it just when they actually choose to apply to certain jobs?
Just when they choose to apply to certain jobs.
Okay, that's great.
If you put your resume up on Indeed Resume, certainly it depends on how you want to choose to put it up there. And so organizations will have the opportunity to view resumes that are on Indeed Resume, but of course the job seeker has all opportunity to place it as they see fit. So if they want to keep their current company confidential, for example, that's certainly their option.
Oh, that's great. Well, as you see all these jobs coming through, are there certain industries or job types that you see that are growing in popularity? Yeah,
so if we look at job types, for example, we've gathered data on keywords that appear the most on job postings, and really currently you're looking at things such as HTML5. That's essentially the fastest growing keyword found on online job postings, followed by a few other tech acronyms: MongoDB, iOS, Android, and mobile app. Those are some of the sort of trending keywords in the market right now. But some of the top employers that are doing kind of most of the hiring around right now are, believe it or not, finance, tech, service, and of course health-related industries. So J.P. Morgan, for example, in the New York area, or Salesforce in San Francisco, or let's say Sibley Memorial in Washington, D.C., just to name a few.
Wow, that's interesting. I actually occasionally will look at the job trends on Indeed, and I saw the HTML5 and all of those other sort of computer-related jobs, and I thought, wow, this has got to be confusing for anybody not in this field to see this list.
Yeah, you could say that for sure, but obviously with the internet and or digital advertising and some of the other things growing these days, these are some of the popular acronyms for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for I know that especially among younger people, I see this, and I also see it sometimes among people in their 40s that are sort of looking to shift gears a little bit. But when job seekers are specifically looking for flexibility, what are some of the top occupations that you see and Indeed sees in terms of, what are the occupations that offer more flexibility?
Yeah, and I guess it comes down to how one defines flexibility, but generally speaking, sales, personal care and services, arts, design, entertainment, sports, media, office and administrative support, and then followed up by, let's say, education, training, and so forth. So those are some of the top jobs that are kind of trending when it comes to flexibility. And obviously sales, I think just by the very nature of the role itself, allows individuals to, in many cases, kind of chart their own territory, right? Especially if they're an outside salesperson.
No, that's a great point. I've seen that a lot with my consulting clients that are salespeople. They do have a lot more flexibility. Yeah, those tend to be the clients who can come in during the day for a meeting. Versus some of the others who have to, sneak away at lunch or come at night.
That's exactly right. And the other thing to keep in mind around flexibility, with the economy still, in some cases, uncertain, many employers are seeking assistance of freelance or contract or temporary help, and it gives people an opportunity to kind of come in and work hours that they may see fit, while also really getting a sense of what that organization may be like without, fully committing to the business.
I think that's a really great point about contracting. Do you see that kind of continuing to grow in the future? I mean, have you noticed trends in that area?
I would say yes. I think more and more individuals are turning to that because it's flexible. In some cases, quite frankly, it can pay even more. Mm-hmm. Depending on the role itself, certainly in the case of graphic design or in some cases software development, there's plenty of opportunity for people to come in on a contract basis and really in some cases kind of move from company to company to company and do quite well and allow themselves to have the flexibility that a true full-time job may otherwise allow.
No, I totally agree. I think it's also great in terms of developing your skills because you're always getting to work on sort of new accounts and new projects, and it really never gets old.
Well, and you bring up a great point because in addition to the skill set, you're dealing with different cultures, you're mm-hmm. dealing with different individuals, whether it be startups, whether it be large legacy organizations, and so the individual that has been successful in completing projects within those environments mm-hmm. really becomes an even more marketable individual.
Absolutely. I love that, and I really like the idea of being kind of industry agnostic and being able to move between different businesses. I think it's very powerful.
Absolutely.
So I know, like here in Memphis, it's interesting in terms of industries. Like we are a hub for orthopedics research, for example. So we attract a lot of engineers that are in the biomedical field. And then there are other fields like marketing where I really see job seekers struggling. And so, from your perspective, how important is location for job seeking, and are there some certain cities that you might recommend that recent graduates look at?
Well, I think location is important. Mm-hmm. I think there are going to be certain hubs for different industries. I think that's just a fact. In fact, New York actually is really starting to rival the Silicon Valley, and they've really done a great job in attracting a lot of tech organizations here around the city. And so you'll start to see kind of the lower half of Manhattan and even Brooklyn start to really see a lot of startups. So I think it depends on what that recent grad is looking for, but location is certainly very important. We indeed has published a recent hiring lab report that discusses trends of people, kind of looking at a state for better opportunities. Mm-hmm. So some of the popular cities for recent grads may be, believe it or not, Washington, D.C., mm-hmm. New York, Houston, Chicago, and then San Francisco. And again, I think it depends on what the recent grad's looking for, but some of those pieces may include where all the job openings are, particular or average rent, and mm-hmm. things that are obviously critical to individuals just getting their career started.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally agree. And I actually, I think those are all really great cities. I also wrote an article this week that came out about, taking a look, too, at sort of mid-sized cities. I think there are a lot of sort of underdog cities that are really focused on, like, rebuilding their downtowns, and they're trying really hard to attract new, young talent. So while those cities may have fewer jobs, I think sometimes if you can find a job in one of those cities, they may pay you a little more. Sometimes they may work harder to get you. And it may be a little less competitive sometimes than a city like New York that has so many qualified people.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And for the recent grad, I think, again, getting to better understand what's best for them. New York may be too overwhelming for one, whereas maybe a mid-size or a smaller city may be a better fit, like in Indianapolis, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love New York. I actually went to college in upstate New York. And so I spent quite a bit of time, visiting the city. And occasionally I'll have a client that will say, I've decided, I want to move to New York. What do you think? And I'll say, I think it's a great idea. How do you feel about your car? And how do you feel about the really big apartment that you live in? I mean, are you okay to reprioritize things a little bit?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great city and it's a great experience, but I think you have to keep in perspective that there are things that you have to give up when you take that on.
Yeah, and the other thing that might be worth keeping in mind, again, especially for the recent grad, if they're living in one state and want to move to a city like New York or San Francisco, a lot of employers are reluctant to pay for any relocation or offer any monies to do that. And so job seekers and recent grads need to be cognizant of that, and they need to make it, let's say, as easy as possible for that employer. And so they really should do that due diligence, and if they have friends in that area, really make a point of almost expressing to the employer that they've already covered that, and they're making a point of being in that location.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree, because especially in a big city like New York, they really don't need to relocate out-of-state candidates or out-of-city candidates because they have enough people. So if you're really compelled to move there, I think you do have to make it a priority and be willing to tell that employer, hey, I can relocate myself. I also think it's a great idea to actually go to the city and visit and try to have in-person meetings while you're there. Because, when you're just applying from your state that's, say say you live in Texas or something, you're not like a real person to anyone. I think when you can get their attention and actually show up in person, it shows some level of commitment and seriousness it's different.
Well, you're absolutely right. And in today's market, recent grads are applying everywhere because they want a job. And, I question whether or not the recent grad has done enough due diligence to really appreciate, sort of the logistics involved, right, and everything that's involved in making that move. And so, to your point, if you show up on scene, not only is that organization going to, get to see who you are and really appreciate, the person you are, but they'll see that level of commitment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think too, sometimes companies that might not yet be to the point in the process where they would normally have an interview with you, maybe they wouldn't normally call you for a few more months. They may sit down with you and have a meeting with you if you're in person because it's, just a few minutes of their time. It saves them from having to fly you somewhere, and they get to meet you. So sometimes I think it also creates a sense of urgency when you go in person.
Yeah, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I noticed that Indeed also recently put out a list of top places to work if you're looking for work-life balance. And I know that for sure is something that comes up with my clients who are in their 40s and 50s. But what are some of the factors that you looked at, and what are a few of the companies who made that list?
Yeah, I think it was looking at factors such as accommodating and flexible schedules, friendly work environments, the availability of certain facilities such as gyms for employees, and so on. So those are some of the main, I think, factors that were looked at. Mm-hmm. And I think some of the companies that sort of topped that list were Colgate, Wegmans, Coldwell Banker, H&R Block, and Google.
Oh, that's great. Wow, Wegmans.
Yeah.
And for those folks who don't have a Wegmans, it's a grocery store, right?
That's exactly right.
That's great. Well, are there any pieces of advice in terms of caution that you'd offer to job seekers who are applying online?
And indeed, we would say, we advise consumers to be careful with their online activity. Be careful to share personal information unless you know that the site is secure, and you should educate yourself on your privacy online. And I've witnessed personally or seen sort of many of these IM scams where an individual may be engaged, and then all of a sudden an IM discussion has been taken up. And so individuals just have to be careful about that, because through that vehicle, people will ask for all these personal details. And so I think really it's like anything else. You just have to do a little more due diligence, make sure that when you send out, whether it be your resume or any other personal information, you sort of have some idea as to where that's going.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very smart. That's smart. Well, I know, in your role, you've also been instrumental in hiring like hundreds of people for Indeed and for other organizations. Do you have some advice that you might offer those who are searching for a job in terms of how they might prepare for, their interview once they kind of, they've applied online and they finally have landed an interview? Are there any tips that you might offer?
Yeah, I think, again, generally speaking, you want to make sure that the job you're applying to is one that you can speak to and one that your skills and or interests really align very well.
Mm-hmm.
And outside of that, I think the more due diligence you can do about the organization, about the people you're going to meet, there's so many, there's so many things online, whether it be blogs or other profiles through which you can find details about the person you'll meet, the company you're going to interview for, maybe the potential to even talk to other people who are at the organization. You may find through alumni that there's many people that work at that same organization you're going to interview for, and if one takes the time to have conversations with, with alum, right, as that major connection, they can learn a lot about the culture of the organization before going in and really try and understand, even in some cases, what a role may be like.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. And, I recommend this to my clients because in addition to being able to sort of learn more, I think you can also sometimes find out if there are really great things going on at an organization or sometimes negative things that people would not otherwise be willing to share with you during the actual interview. But over a coffee, someone would maybe be willing to tell you a little bit of what's really going on at the organization. I think that can be really helpful as you're making a decision.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Obviously, there's online reviews. Indeed has quite a bit of reviews ourselves, and certainly those are other things that one can look at, and I would suggest that they do look at, but taking it with a grain of salt, really, and realizing that they are reviews, and good and bad. People just need to be mindful of the fact that it may not be the perfect picture of the organization.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Absolutely. I think the other thing, too, you mentioned is using the internet to sort of learn more about those people you'll be talking to. And, sometimes folks say to me, well, is that strange? I mean, I kind of feel like I'm stalking the person. But I think that the more that you understand about them, the more that you find out, hey, I have something in common with them, or hey, I relate to them in this other, way. And it gives you really an opportunity, I think, in the interview to connect more. And that really helps your chances of turning that interview into a job offer.
Yeah, and I would totally agree, and I'm not advising individuals to go in and say, geez, I know your license plate number is XXXYZ, but to your point, I think if they can form a connection, if they see that an individual has given a certain speech or has certain interests, there may be a real connection there, and some point through the conversation in the interview, it may come up, right? And then all of a sudden now you've made a real personal connection with that individual, and now you've potentially put yourself ahead of many others.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, as I've used Indeed, I've noticed that Indeed actually provides salary estimates for many of the jobs that are available. How does Indeed kind of estimate what a salary would be for a particular job?
Yeah, I mean, we sort of pull the estimates from over 50 million job postings from thousands of unique sources over, let's say, a 12-month period. And within that, there's enough job postings that produce salaries for their posting to allow us to really create a statistically significant median salary for a certain job at a certain location. And this information is refreshed regularly. So, just by sheer volume, there's enough for us to really go out and say, hey, look, this is pretty representative of different jobs in different locations.
Okay, that's great. So it sounds like it's just an estimate, and, you can use it as a guide, but it's not necessarily, it's just kind of ballpark.
Yeah, I would even say it's a little bit more than ballpark, just by sheer amount of activity we're gathering and aggregating and the data that we're pulling together. So it's never going to be precise, but it's going to give people a pretty good sense of what's going on with certain jobs in certain areas.
Right. No, that's great. I mean, I think, for a lot of folks, it would be great for them to use it for negotiation in particular. And, how do you find that folks are using that information?
I think to your point, it allows them to really determine whether or not they're underpaid or overpaid, or if in a situation where they're receiving an offer, they certainly can make sure that the offer is equitable, relatively speaking. Mm-hmm. Some individuals, of course, are potentially looking to move from state to state, so they want to get some calibration as to salaries in those two locations, just to make sure that they're not losing out, relatively speaking. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a myriad of ways people are using the information.
That's such a good point. I think, I talk with a lot of job seekers about this, the idea that different locations pay different salaries. And something that I've kind of noticed anecdotally has been sometimes larger cities actually pay less than smaller cities, even though the cost of living is higher. But there's often more competition on the job-seeking side, and so you've got more people who may be willing to take less. So I just think it's just really important to kind of educate yourself on what those different salaries are, like you said, by location.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just another kind of data point for the job seeker to make sure that as they make a decision, a life-changing decision, they feel they've minimized the risk as much as possible.
Absolutely, because it is a huge, huge life-changing decision when you move and you switch jobs. And hopefully folks are staying in those jobs for at least a few years. So, it's quite a big commitment. Right. Hope so. But, you're really uprooting your whole life. You may have to learn a new neighborhood, make new friends, put your kids into a new school if you're moving to a totally different area. So definitely this kind of data and information that's available online is just so valuable to those folks who are looking for jobs.
Absolutely.
Well, is there any other advice that you'd like to share with our listeners today? I'm just such a huge fan of Indeed, so if there's anything we've missed, I'd love to know.
Yeah, I think we covered a lot, and I would just reiterate, I think job seekers need to be thorough. They need to be aggressive and organized. Mm-hmm. And again, I think people just need to truly understand what is it you want to do and how to uncover when interviewing for jobs. Make sure you're just targeting yourself properly, mm-hmm. right? And you start your search online, of course, read reviews, do your homework, and just make sure you're applying to jobs that are relevant. It can be a very frustrating, ordeal if you're not organized and if you're not targeted. And I think people just need to look at their resume as a marketing plan, if you will, right? Make sure that it's performance-based. It tells a story, and not necessarily just have it be a historical document, but more or less dictate or determine where you want to go as opposed to always where you've been.
Oh, yes. I totally agree. And I love the fact that you stress that it's about being organized. It's about marketing yourself. To me, these are very basic things. It's not, rocket science. It's really about putting in the time and the energy and really being committed to this process.
Yeah, without a doubt. And far too often individuals will, and this is sort of one of the downsides of the internet, is that it makes it almost too easy for people to apply. But people still need to be, really very focused on looking at the jobs that are most relevant, and then invest the time necessary to learn everything they can, such that as they get in for the interview, it'll be apparent that they're passionate about that role. And I think the process will be a much better one.
Absolutely. Well, usually the very last question that I ask for all my podcasts are, how can listeners contact you? But I really hope that all of the listeners have already been to Indeed.com because it's just such a great site. I hope everyone will go. Uh-huh.
Yeah, no, I hope they will as well. And, certainly my contact detail, msteinerd@indeed.com, is probably the best way people can engage.
Great, great. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for joining me. The discussion today has been very helpful. And thank you, everyone, for listening. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please be sure to subscribe on iTunes and tune in next week for another edition of the Copeland Coaching Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.